So, a little bit of a late start. I'm guessing everyone's here for Trajectory of Military Technology, right? Yep. If you're not, you are now. So, welcome. So you guys are in an interesting circumstance. It looks like they gave me this panel all alone. So you are at my mercy. Actually, we're going to have a lot of question and answer for this one because with the number of people and everything. So if you guys do have any questions or anything comes to mind, just raise your hand and we'll discuss. So just a very quick background. My name is Kerry Major. I am a technologist, historian, anthropologist, and general nerd. I don't know how else to put it. I don't have anything for sale. You can't buy anything from me, so ha, joke's on you. But I do a lot of these panels and things like that. So to get started, I just want to do a quick kind of show of hands here. How many people in this room are authors?
Repeat that.
How many people in this room are authors? Of any kind. Freelance, doesn't matter. This, you write something and occasionally you might read it or someone else might read it. Okay. How many people in this room here are kind of tech nuts? All right. How many people in this room are ex-military? Thank you for your service. All right. So what
ex-military brat doesn't count?
Thank you for your father's service, mother's service. So what are we talking about with trajectory of military technology? Well, we're talking about past, present, future. And why does this help? So everyone has their favorite little stories from the past. Weapons, technologies, and by technologies we also mean tactics, things like that. And the thought that these are eventually going to come back into play. Now, authors, game designers, people like that, always looking for ways to kind of push the envelope on those and maybe make their chosen weapons work. Tech nuts and whatnot, military guys usually want to figure out where's the stuff headed? What are the battlefields going to look like in 50, 100, 200 years? And flat out, I'm going to tell you there is no way I'm going to be able to tell you what they're going to look like. There's no way anyone is going to be able to tell you what they're going to look like. If you look at the history of military technologies, you have an amazing amount of actually really ingenious devices, very useful things that get sidelined for reasons like they don't look like a proper rifle. An excuse that was used for the Garand bullpup that was invented back in the 1946. Things like this. But more importantly, we're going to look at sci-fi and where does this lead to. So, I'm going to, 5 people raise your hands. 5 opinionated people raise your hands. And I want you to think of the first thing that really comes to mind to you as a future technology.
Future technology
Future
or
technology
current
that you're going to
one?
see in, this could be a current technology, something that's in development, or something that...
Drones.
Drones. Drones is a huge one.
Robotics.
Robotics.
Yeah.
Robotics.
Yeah.
Well, robotics and drones can be different. There can be some room for...
Nanotech.
Nanotech. Nanotech is one of those big, wonderful fields. It's like, what do we do with this stuff? And then the actual answer is, what don't we do with this stuff? Augmented reality. Augmented reality. AR gets into some really interesting things, like an AR, which I just think is the best. And I think we had a couple more.
AGI?
Weaponized smallpox.
Weaponized smallpox, bioweaponry.
Yeah.
Not new, but developing, definitely.
No doubt.
AGI?
AGI, you're going to have to, there's the acronym out for me there.
Let's see. Artificial General Intelligence.
Ah, yes, things like that. Close this if you guys don't mind.
You'll be hot.
We're going to cook to death anyway, so.
Cold fusion.
Cold fusion. Power in general. Batteries. Superconductors. How is all of this going to affect the battlefield?
Assaulting batteries.
Yeah, assaulting batteries. Assaulting batteries can be very, very destructive. Depends on the amount of power in it, right? So let's start there. Actually, that's kind of a good way to start. A question to you, and I want to do this by show of hands. How many of you think weapons will become considerably more lethal? How many of you think weapons are going to become considerably more efficient, but not necessarily more lethal? Okay,
Both.
this is an interesting question because you always look at have firearms, since their inception, gotten more deadly? And
We'll
this-
also have weapons that are considerably less lethal.
Less lethal, and you have a push to actually make weapons that are designed to be less lethal.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I know
No,
you're
you're fine.
but the trend that I see
Oh, yeah.
is weapons are becoming both more efficient and more lethal.
Well,
And so-
yeah, you're always working on a continuum there, right? You've got the, let's make this tiny and make it fit my pocket, and let's make this blow up a tank from 50 feet.
Yeah, that's a good
And
point,
fit my
because
pocket.
a lot of the so-called efficient means, like the smart bombs, those were meant to be able to take out the enemy while leaving the allies, 200 yards away, unharmed.
So, I mean,
Wow, 2,000 yards away.
yeah. And you can look at the development of weapons technologies as, and not to generalize, but sometimes you can look at Cold War development of American technologies versus Russian technologies, where the American technologies usually relied upon putting that thing exactly where they wanted, and the Russian technologies frequently dealt with making the blast radius big enough to ensure that you got the thing. Not always, but it's just a generalization. Now, as you see military technology grow, you very rarely, but you do occasionally take steps backwards. But usually, things get better with time. I'm sure that some of the military people here would argue that occasionally newly implemented technologies, F-35 being a better plane than the A-10.
But they don't
Question
get
mark.
better evenly. And I
They
will say
don't.
this, having done the last 8 years of my career, is putting new technology on old ships to support the Marines on board those ships, is when you have large capital-intensive things that you put together, amphibious ships, aircraft carriers, technology insertion happens irregularly along the way, and you will have a large number of older types and a large number of newer types, and probably an uneven amount of new technology insertion across those, depending on budgets.
Yeah, I mean, some of the hilarious stories of radar vehicles being mounted on horse-drawn carriages in early onset of World War II. You see stories like that where it was just what they had, right? So there's that implementation and logistics angle that's always going to kind of muddle the waters. But getting back to a bit more of an issue of power and things like that, one of the things that I think is probably a good evidence or a good thing to go off of, and we're going to extrapolate this, I'm sure everyone has a different picture in their mind, the handgun. Handgun's been around for quite a while. Has not been the same for all of that time. Go back to 1820s. You're going to be carrying a very different handgun than you were in 1700s, assuming that you had a handgun in the 1700s, which would arguably be a good way to lose that hand.
And there's no such thing as a best handgun, or best bullet, or best weapon.
Exactly. But what do you think it'll look like in 50 years?
Bunch of different things, depends what your goal is.
A ton.
I think it'll depend on your situation, because I go back to, again, my experience. A lot of fiction that I used to read fast didn't take into account logistics as much. And then when I read fiction and all of a sudden I see some mention of, well, and then in the fleet we've got the factory ship, or then in the fleet, or then within the unit I've got my 3D printer capability. Then I started to see at least the guy was, was paying attention to some idea. In the future, I see the idea of I'll build the best weapon or the best add-on to my weapon that I need at the time for that situation, and I'll have that capability.
The history of weapons has had to go hand in hand with the history of logistics.
And history of tactics.
Yeah, and logistics is a hell of a lot more important than
Yes.
You can overwhelm tactics by good logistics.
Yes. Well, that really dates back to the Romans, right?
Oh,
the
yeah.
Romans won their battles because of logistics in many cases, and superior logistics managed to capture most of Europe, and would have captured most of Asia had they had better logistics.
and then the Mongols.
Yes. Well, they had some impressive logistics that were surprisingly free-form, but worked. Is really the important thing. But so, why this focus on? Why am I going to the handgun? Think of your favorite sci-fis. Does anyone else find it really strange that a lot of them tend to kind of put things down to this is the one thing that everyone has? Like the phaser, the standard issue phaser being basically uniform. The security guy doesn't have a bigger one. None of the other guys really bother carrying them. I mean, granted, their weapons are simultaneously, as we talked about, less than lethal and presumably can destroy, I don't know, I'm not a big Trekkie, but Trekkies keep telling me that they can destroy large buildings, and I still don't believe them.
Well, let's go with the phaser rifles now at that point.
Yeah, well,
They don't have,
The
they don't
phaser
have
did whatever
handguns
it
that-
needed to do
The
for that
handguns need
episode.
your hands, why?
the biggest problem
The
biggest problem, if you made a handgun that could output the power to destroy a small star, the problem is, after that fact, first you've got the recoil. And if you're shooting at something bigger, then you're going away from it. You're making a retreat. It's a skirmish weapon, right? And then there's the problem of heat buildup.
Yeah.
You know, we can put the biggest battery on the biggest blaster rifle, and you're going to drop that thing very, very quickly after you fire that once, or maybe just recharging. You know, energy kind of has this thing about entropy and heat. But anyway,
Use transporter beams as a weapon.
so another thing that was brought up actually here is specialization of weaponry, specialization of equipment, specialization of roles. This is a big, interesting thing because specialization has always kind of been in and out of the military at different points in time, right? You have attempts to build universal soldiers. You have attempts to build soldiers that can handle just about everything throughout history, regardless of if you're looking at wars that occurred prior to firearms. You had a large issue with the Landsknecht. The Landsknecht were designed to be full spectrum warriors. And then you have specialization in the Roman military. So, show of hands, just, I don't know, I like using you guys as guinea pigs. Who thinks the trend will go towards specialization in the future? And this is a caveat, you don't have to be 100% bought in. Who thinks it will go towards generalism?
See, I have a hand both of both.
Yeah. It's going to be mission specific.
Because I believe strongly that it will be both.
Yeah, you're going to need people who can handle a little bit of everything. You're going to need people who can handle very specific things.
If I can make my generalist, and then I can provide them with the necessary capabilities that they need for specialization when they need them with a guided AI, just-in-time training, yada yada, right before doing it, and then I can provide them with that. But I want a general combat capability across the line too. Every Marine rifleman,
Yeah, exactly.
plus whatever their specialty.
And one of the interesting things that you can think about in that angle is with this kind of, okay, we have a base point, and now we can jump off that into any specialization. Even if you don't specialize things, a big thing that gets missed a lot in history is that every person who's ever fought has been at least competent at doing all the tasks, right? A French peasant who picked up a sword can sharpen their sword. They had a base understanding of at least what makes the stuff go for their base job. They acquire it very quickly. Yes?
The base job, though, is more your communications. The guy in the field can't touch it.
Yeah.
Computer, their attack uplink, they can't. They open it, things get wet, it doesn't work. They can service a weapon, but I think in the future we're going to see more of like the DDoS attack that just hit us.
Mhm.
When we go in to take care of the kids doing that, assuming that it is the Russian kids, you have to have
China.
an IT guy to reclaim the stuff. You have to have somebody who's combat ready, but can say, oh, let's reset things.
Yeah. I'm not saying that there aren't specialists and that everyone can perform every task. What I'm saying is that for a lot of people, these things might be black box operations, but they know how to turn it off and on again when it starts throwing one error that they've seen 50 times.
Isn't there an issue of dividing out your, who's your soldier? Your soldier is a person who's going in and physically doing, fighting or something, or is it your tech? Maybe they also do other things and whatever, is it your industrial capacity? I mean, they're building the rifles, but they aren't shooting them, right?
Well, there's a really big question there, though. I mean, when you talk about a soldier, what are you specifically talking about? I mean, are we talking about a
Right, that's what I'm
rifleman? Are we
asking.
talking about a tank operator? Are we talking about the guys who go in first on planes?
Yeah, well, I was confused,
Yeah.
confused with your question, because are the soldiers gonna be more similar, or are we gonna have offload even more of the, the logistics or the other?
Cyber war.
Right, I mean, is that a soldier, or is that guy just some guy sitting at a computer?
I paid a lot of money for contractors in
Or is that just
Afghanistan
another department of the military?
that were IT support guys.
Right.
Yeah.
I paid a lot of money for those folks. I see that as, and I don't see that going away
Well, I mean,
anytime
Yeah.
soon. But that's different than the guys I've got outside the wire, or the guys I've got running security.
Yeah, and I mean, cyber warfare, not to dismiss it or to say that it's not dangerous, it's never going to take ground, right? You're not going to get
Don't say never.
Okay. Without the implementation of drones, other things through which the cyber environment can interface with the physical environment, you're not going to take.
Only to the same degree that air power only
Yeah,
claims that they take,
Well, the
Yes.
human soldier is often the weak point in these weapons. You can do a lot of things, you build the technology, but if you have to put a normal human in the center of it, they're going to be the failure point. So at what point are we pulling humans off the field and letting machines do all the fighting? Because that seems like that real next stage of warfare.
That's an interesting point. One sec, because I know you've had your hand up for a good bit.
So a lot of this, I think, goes back to your initial question about, for me anyway, about what the handgun's going to look like in 50 years. I think it's going to look like a remote control. because the amount and the number of things that will be quote-unquote bullets will increase, and their size will progressively decrease. And it's going to be the kind of remote control, the kind of software that's loaded on, and maybe somewhat the training the person has, but if the software is good enough, the training more and more will become moot.
Which is not that different from the guy who calls in the A10 for.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, see, I'm seeing it as a progression from what's already been happening, so
Okay.
that's what I wanted to bring up.
That ties into what
Right,
you talked about.
yeah.
Let's get to that in just a moment here.
Oh, I was just gonna say, as to that mix of, man versus machine on the battlefield, I think until you're willing to give AIs full autonomy to make decisions and empower them that way, that it's gonna end up being a mix. And the mix may start as a 30% robotic, 70% human mix, and then it may go 50-50, and then it may eventually be 90-10. But the advantage of having that human in the loop close in a relatively unjammable area, that means that I'm not running it all remotely from 100 miles back. I've got somebody on the ground who's got eyes on the initial area, and I've got somebody who I've decided I will trust with that kind of combat firepower.
And I think that's an interesting point, actually. So, the human element. We talk about AIs, and a computer system can very, very quickly, on orders that our nervous system can't actually operate at, make decisions and implement those decisions. But we always have this problem of, well, is a computer making a really good decision? There's the whole Skynet question. Can we get computers to just come and wipe us all out? Or will they just end up
Tesla's not
giving up
100%
and-
safer, but it's safer than people.
Yeah, well,
And do people make mistakes?
And-
A lot.
so that's an interesting point that we get into. One of the things that we're seeing a lot more, and this also goes down to, someone said augmented reality earlier. The interfacing of humans with technology is a really interesting thing because, for years we've had the ability to, for instance, track gun turrets based off of where you're currently looking. That is an incredibly powerful thing because there's a lot that humans can do for profile recognition that computers aren't even close to right now. For figuring out, if I look and try and count the number of people here or find something, I will do it much more accurately than my camera phone might, and even with all the facial recognition software in the world. But it'll remember it and it can tell me exactly how far you are away. I can't do that.
I just saw a demo though, online video, a demo for a drone that will look over a compound and pick out who's got weapons and differentiate between a camera being pointed at the drone and a weapon being pointed at the drone.
This technology.
And there is another thing that they've been working on, which was a quicker way to do some of that. And some of that incorporated putting basically a system of electrodes on a human operator, pointing out different things and making them look at them, and then tracking their emotional state when they looked at the target. That person looks at someone, says, that's one of ours. The emotions that they actually have regarding, oh, I know that's one of our soldiers, immediately tells the system, friendly. Looks at something, says, I have no idea what that is, but I'm not scared of it. Look at something and say, oh God, that's terrifying, priority target, that guy. I'm sorry, we had one guy with his hand up in the back.
Okay, I would point out though, I know we're talking about the human as being the weak link, and I'm going to tell you right now, my Blue Force tracker crapped out on me a lot more times than any of my soldiers ever did. So the technology failed to me more often than soldiers.
It's not there yet.
Well,
Well,
Now, granted, future tech maybe, but I've been in the military for quite a while now, and I don't think the tech's gotten that much better.
But a lot of that gets designed though. People don't design things to fail gracefully. I mean, and things should fail gracefully. It should not be an all or nothing. It should be a degradations of efficiency, and I can get by. I will be willing to accept lower degrees of okay as long as it still keeps functioning to some degree.
And I think that's an interesting point and a very good one, because when you take the machines out of the equation, or even if you have machines in the equation, technology will fail. There's no question about that.
So do people.
Cyber warfare is a great way of saying technology will fail. We haven't experienced the extent to which it can yet. And at the end of the day, a soldier can still beat you to death with his non-functioning laptop. the drones can fall out of the sky and all that stuff, but the guy can still come by, pick up the chair that he was sitting in, and hurl it at you. And that is still an important thing to keep in mind, is that there's that human element. And I think AI's augmented reality, drone combat, all of these things are going to work to significantly enhance that base experience. But at the end of the day, if you pick up your gun and suddenly it thinks that all friendlies are hostiles, all hostiles are friendlies, and all planes are large flying tubas, you throw it away, pick up something else, or you just hold the damn thing in place and just start firing until you hit something that you think is an enemy. Not to say that humans are always going to make that decision perfectly, but we do what we can, right?
What are the thoughts then on cybernetics? So we're directly enhancing the humans themselves.
Cybernetics are, an interesting. Let's get back on that one.
All right.
I want to get back to that one when we talk about robotics and drones a little bit more.
I had a quick comment. I work in software QA, so and his comment sort of jostled that. It was like our software QA in America at least is primitive. A lot of it is manual. A lot of it is rushed to get into what we call agile sprints, which are like two week long sprints, and it is really primitive. And we're starting to get automated QA, where we write programs to check the programs so that they can check every case, so that they do fail gracefully. Where we do find a bug, which is anything that doesn't fail gracefully or it shouldn't be there, And so that's going to be a huge quality control thing. Just like quality control, I think when the first repeating rifle came on the line, or a rifle that you could assemble or something like that, the guy had to put it in pre-sort into barrels before he showed Congress, because half of them would fail, so he could get the contract.
Yeah,
because putting them together, like half of them would fail putting so he needed to get the contract together. But
we talk about QA and things that can go wrong, right? And that being one of the big challenges. And why is that such a challenge? Well, as complexity increases, the number of things that can possibly break that make your life more miserable increase as well. A club has a few failure states. Namely, it breaks, it falls out of your hand, There aren't many things where your club fails to interface with the object that you're hitting, simply because the kinetic energy is not quite in the correct format for it to accept that.
If you try to knock someone out, it can fail.
It can definitely fail, and you can fail because of other,
Kill 'em.
Your club may have a problem with getting past the firewall of the plate mail that person's wearing. Then they may laugh and take you out with a greatsword.
But when tried to drag the woman by the head, it was a live woman after he pops her.
Yeah, and she can just pick up a nice sharpened rock and go for the jugular. But as that increases, swords can fail in a myriad of ways. I mean, rust, corrosion, damage to the cuillance, metal fatigue, all of those are, small ways it can fail. We then go to flintlocks. Flintlocks can fail in a wonderful variety of spectacular, explosive, deadly to everyone within 10 feet ranges.
And yet every one of these was considered worth it and put on the field and was able to defeat whatever the prior one is, despite the lower failure rate.
Especially if you could send other people to use them.
I would make the arguments, but much of that that was all new technology at the time. And as designs mature, and we're still in the first real couple of generations of really high-teching the battlefield. Okay, the example everybody gets, well, I can put a round through my paper map and it'll still be a map. Well, when I get to the point where I can put a round through my OLED map and it routes around the now busted pixels and I still get a map, then I'll know that I've made the design leap in map technology that's just as good.
And they may even be better, right? They may be able to detect where the damage is to the OLED and say, oh, hey, there's something really important under this.
Or it just gives me a smaller view of the full map.
Or even better, you have a bulletproof map.
Yes.
The map's an enhancement into your, plugged
There
into your
is a
brain.
certain amount, you can only get so small, because you have to do N+1
Update
damage to the
immediately from
person.
satellite.
Well, you also have things, right? The manual physical interface
Well,
has to
exactly.
be, can't be any smaller than this, or something.
You have to have propellant, you have to have a certain size ballistic. I mean, there's a reason we don't use BB guns for combat, despite Sarah Palin's thoughts on that.
We don't use BB guns for combat, but we do use BB-sized projectiles in railguns, which will go straight through a tank. Now, we don't know what good that does. Let's be able to punch a hole that big through heavy armor, but we'll find a way.
It's what you drag through with it. As it
Sorry,
goes through.
I'm
Trust me, you put a BB hole.
You can't carry a railgun yet as a handgun. And therein lies the problem is you have to, looking at like 50 years down the road, unless we come up with massive either power generation or storage steps, we're going to be stuck with a chemical-based propellant that you want it to go bang every time you pull the trigger and make sure the other guy doesn't get backed up if you hit him.
Oh, of course. And that's also going to depend on what's between you and the other guy, right? The range that combat will take place in is going to be a big contributor, as well as the body armor, the countermeasure technologies that you have available to make sure that the guy can't see you in the first place to hit you. All of those are going to factor into what does that little handgun look like, and what does it shoot, and how far that way do you go when you fire it,
And
how
maybe it's
hot
a
does it
remote
get?
control.
And
Maybe what fired was a drum.
is there a remote control? Was it held by something else? Are you basically playing Wild West with a whole bunch of drones, and whoever can jump drones the fastest wins? But all of that aside, let's put all of this aside for a second, because I'm a tangential person. I happen to love this format where we're wandering all over the place. But I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I'm loving it. But a really interesting thing to look at, right? Where does all of this eventually lead? Do wars continue to be fought in the same ways? And the big question we have here is what is the battlefield going to look like, and will there be a battlefield? We look at a world where, in the past few years, war has increasingly become almost a series of asymmetric battles and political saber rattling. Because weapons have gotten so terrifying that if someone actually decides to pull the trigger on their entire arsenal, we all lose. That's not going to go away or get better as time goes on, especially when you're looking at things where if you have the ability to put giant destroyers and battleships in the stars, you bet you have the ability to do some horrible, horrible things on the way there.
Yeah, I was
Question?
wondering,
Well,
Sorry.
comment, I guess. Battles especially tend to be asymmetric in general because you don't put troops in the field unless you're going to win. And overwhelming odds in your favor is always better than not. So generally we don't start wars unless we know we're going to win.
If you're following Sun Tzu,
Yeah.
but there's a whole bunch of
Well,
other.
there's a lot of idiots out
You
there.
don't always have that choice, either. If you're pressed, if the enemy's
I was
coming
going to bring this up,
Well, if the
to
enemy's
this
coming
point
after
out
you're
before you
probably
did.
gonna lose.
Wars throughout history,
Yeah.
you've had somebody who says, I
Guys,
cannot defeat this enemy. So they've been doing guerrilla war, cochise, and all of our enemies say, you know, oh, we've just had somebody carrying a bomb in. Or the cyber attacks, they'll be all over the place. There's no place to put your troops, your boots on the ground. You know, and that's not new, it's old.
no, it's been around. I mean, the Fabius the Delayer. Anyone ever heard of that guy? Like, brilliant Roman general. No one's heard of him. Single-handedly held off the Carthaginians for something like 20. What was it?
Well, he just refused to go fight that he went.
Yeah.
to.
What do you
Attack
mean
the
single-handedly? Well, single-handedly with his entire group of guys, a bunch of supporting.
Look how long cochise lasted.
We're talking him and his men. I mean, at that point, really, it was, you had one guy with a whole bunch of troops that were handpicked and his own guys.
People
Nero
don't
the
wait to have
consul.
a big army. They know they have the small army, so they don't fight the same rules.
And I don't necessarily say that they wouldn't. They don't fight. They don't fight head on.
But same rules.
But you fight.
When, yeah.
Well, the Romans had the superior number.
And how do we defeat them
Animal head on.
in the future technology?
Well, and the question is what constitutes. At that point, you get into a very interesting part of the philosophy of warfare. What constitutes defeat? For years, it was, well, we took your capital. You lost. War of 1812 rolls around. They take our capital, and we say, we didn't lose. We're here. We're still here. You gonna move us?
But there's wars of national survival, and then there's everything else. And a lot of what you're willing to employ at each of those stages in that continuum is very different.
Yes.
You know, there's a reason we did not employ tactical nuclear weapons in Iraq and Afghanistan.
There are many.
There are many, yes. It was not a war of national survival. Arguably war of retribution in both cases. But if you go, and they'll go back to World War II, arguably a war of sovereignty.
And then you run into the issue of, in science fiction, there are wars of the type of which we cannot really comprehend right now. We have never had to fight an apex predator with the legitimate chance of wiping us out, or the legitimate desire to simply destroy all humans. How does that change warfare? If you have the smaller force, and you're taking it up against a larger force, but your other option is death, what do you do?
We have seen genocidal wars where entire people have been wiped out.
Carthage
Yeah.
assaulted it.
Yes.
Right, and so we can maybe draw some parallels there.
There are a lot of interesting parallels. Sorry, Mika.
So everything comes down to strategy and tactics. If somebody is going to wipe you out, you don't use their strength to fight them. You use your strength to fight them. And you figure out their weaknesses. We don't know in science fiction futures what that will be. We don't know our strengths against their strengths. We know our strengths. We don't know how they match up against theirs.
And our winning conditions to their
That's
winning
game theory,
conditions.
right? I mean, you have to
Yeah,
figure
of
out
course.
what goes with it.
And like you're saying, our winning conditions, that gets into the anthropology and culture of war. What constitutes a defeat? What constitutes a victory? Because it's not always the same. And if you think that you just won,
And they think that they just won.
and they think they just won, well, if you think
That's
you
good.
won and they think they won, then you
Hey,
guys
it's a
are
win-win.
win-win.
Yeah.
Everybody's happy.
But if we think we lost and they think they lost,
you sign the documents and everyone moves on with their life. But that's probably not going to be a commonplace thing. Yes?
In World War II, Germany could have taken Switzerland. Switzerland proceeded to make it too expensive to take Switzerland.
Well,
Yeah, you
Switzerland's
can
in a good position to do so.
blow your bridges, blow everything out, and then challenge them to basically what would be the world's largest biathlon. And,
But they
at that
gave,
point, they
but
just
Switzerland
refuse
gave
to
them an alternative. Or, on the other hand, we'll just stay out of it and offer a neutral area for both sides,
And
and it worked for them.
when we look at stuff like that, where does that line start getting really, really thin? When we're talking, is this military theory anymore? Are we talking military theory? Are we talking political theory? And what is the difference? Is there any difference?
War is just the ultimate form of politics. You are going to mandate that someone does something.
Politics
Politics by
any
other
means.
means.
Arguably, for a lot of our history, it's been the lowest common denominator, right? If we can't understand the other person, at least people understand death.
Sometimes the people say, oh, I'm ruled by a Lutheran or a Catholic today.
Yeah,
It's kind of like
But-
the Hammurabi Code. Is that kind of what you're driving at? Like every single law was death.
well, not entirely, but you can't say, okay, well, there's not a lot of trickery around
Yeah.
death, right? You can't really say, oh, well, here's how these economics play out, and actually this works out in our favor in the long run, and we tricked you into signing this thing. If you go and blow up someone's capital and kill everything that's there, there's not a lot of trickery they can do where they say, maybe they can say, ha, those guys were jerks anyway, we put them all in one city, thank you. You're not going to see a lot of that, right? Sorry, we have...
So I think there's another thing keeps on coming up in my own mind with all this discussion, training. Like, we can't just talk about the technology, we have to talk about what kind of training the soldiers are getting. So like going back to something you had said a while back about how if your drone breaks, you can still throw your chair. But the soldier that's going to win that kind of battle is the one who's practiced throwing a chair before. So is that something else worth talking about? Like what kind of training?
Well, that's true, but the one who repairs the technology best will actually be way ahead of the one who throws the chair best.
Unless the one who throws the chair fast knocks out the one who's trying to
Not
repair
if you
the
don't stay
technology.
alive long enough to get to the drone, fix the drone.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
this goes in actually an interesting direction that interfaces with something we were talking about earlier. Drones represent a unique thing, in that drones represent the closest we're going to get to teleportation technology.
I don't agree with that.
Now, why do I say this? Because a single drone outfitted with the tools and equipment to do a variety of tasks can be taken over by a remote operator, extremely specialized in one task. So something ends up hitting your big black box that no one knows what it does, but it's pretty damn important, right? So we get the guy who built that box. There's a drone standing by, and now that guy is on the field. And if that guy gets shot, well, maybe we have 50 more drones in a truck and we just get one out. And eventually we have to give him a second guy whose job it is to move the drones after they get shot out of the way so that the guy can get back to his panel. But this actually represents a very interesting thing, not only for the military, but for civilian. For instance, the discussions of what if emergency responders were simultaneously universal and specialized? We had that discussion earlier where we're talking about which way does it go? What if you have the abilities that, for instance, a drone can hold a great number of tools. It can have with it access to a great number of systems, or maybe it doesn't even need that because the guy back at the thing has his laptop sitting right next to him with the drone controller. How does that change things? When suddenly one person, well, and obviously we talk about communications delays, telecoms, things like that. You forgot the phone number for this drone this day.
You have a medical corpsman drone.
Yeah, you can have drones for just about anything, and you can have the people behind them, the brains behind them, can shift as quickly as someone can, remote in, forget their password, type it 3 times, lock themselves out, call IT, and then get back into the drone. So we're 10 minutes here. The only reason I asked for a quick 10-minute thing is that usually everyone comes in here with a question they want answered. Is there anyone here who has had something that has not really been answered or discussed that they really want to hear about?
So I still go to the point that no matter what the form of attack, there's a weakness associated with it.
Of course.
I'm looking at the denial of service thing early last week. I, in my job, was affected by this, and I'm sure thousands, millions of people were affected by this. If you are going with a high technology solution, your vulnerabilities are associated with the delivery of the service. I don't care whether it's a cell phone or the internet or you have powered up your own thing to do this, it can still be attacked and brought down.
Which happened with Romans too, when they went on the food wagons.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking, are we going for autonomous drones next? Because then we don't have to worry about this?
Well,
Because,
Well, the autonomous drones are still gonna need batteries or something.
Well,
well, power is another issue. I
there's
mean, you have
logistics involved
solar
in
maybe,
everything.
Yeah, you could always attack logistics.
Probably gotta change
Yeah.
it.
There's-
Exactly.
That's actually one
Well,
of the
and
key
communications
strategies.
always have been.
And beyond attacking logistics,
Yeah.
there will always be a weakness. Every weapon.
Every choice.
Everything you do. I mean, the ground you stand on is not impervious. And as technologies get more and more advanced, more and more destructive, and more capable of doing things that are not yet at the corner of our comprehension, that will become a bigger issue. But you're always, at the end of the day, going to have to think of, can they target your weaknesses and can you get over them? If they destroy the ground underneath you and you have a jetpack, you're probably okay. If they hack into your little drone thing and manage to take it down, but behind that drone is a guy in unpowered power armor, I don't know how that would work, with a chemical-based rifle, you're probably still
Steampunk
okay.
power armor. Yeah, steampunk
Yeah,
power armor.
steampunk, phlebotomy, applied phlebotomy. You will always have layers of complexity, layers of weakness, layers of strength, and perceived weakness where there is none. You can always attack something and very quickly realize, well, that particular unit didn't really use their, they weren't using their GPS systems anyway because they thought that they were glitchy and prone to malfunction. So the fact that you launch an attack on their DDO or on their GPS systems basically means they just go, ha, I was right, and keep shooting. Congratulations, you boosted enemy morale.
well, when you were just discussing that when I came in, you were talking about how things can fail. It's like, okay, I have a 1911, and I'll tell you right now, if I was going to the field, I'd take a revolver. I wouldn't take my 1911 because I know how it fails.
And at some point, if they manage to find different ways to make handguns less effective, ranged weapons less effective, you have the shielding question. And there's that old Dune adage, the slow knife pierces the shield. I do think a soldier will ever, raise your hand if you think a soldier will never go onto a battlefield with a combat knife.
Oh, wow. Oh, never? Oh, no.
Never.
No. Always, yes, never.
First of all, define field.
Even if I never use it for combat, it serves
Look,
purposes.
if I'm a drone controller back in the days,
I always had a leather.
I'm going to keep a knife just because.
Just trip wires.
Even if it's just symbolism, right?
Well, the
You
reason
have
I
those
carried a
things.
knife was to cut my parachute shroud.
Yeah, or an entrenching tool. A number of times entrenching tools were used for combat purposes, or the number of times they were used to dig a latrine because you really needed to go.
Damn.
There's going to be a lot of technologies that we never get rid of simply because having it around, there's so many things you can do with it. Good example, the Viking axe, the bearded axe. Great tool, still used because at the end of the day, it's still an axe. And it's still a hammer, and it still has a little cutty bit on it. You can still bludgeon the computer when it stops working and get out your frustrations on this box and probably.
Original soldiers needed to know how to hunt
Yeah,
before they had the logistics to carry that gruel.
and set up a tent. And pack their clothing. All that stuff is important.
Just to make your point, the first Gulf War, I know a number of guys that were there, and they've told me there are a lot of guys out there carrying swords. So, it works, why not, you know?
If it's deadly, it's a weapon. Or if your opponent thinks it's deadly, it's a weapon. If you charge them with a foam sword and they are scared enough that they manage to miss or surrender, it's a weapon.
Well, even just disabling, I mean, for other reasons.
If you yell at someone and they get spooked, drop their weapon and surrender, that is a weapon. Bagpipes are a terrifying weapon.
Well, that's why a lot of people who haven't been in the military have a misdefinition of casualty. What you really want is to wound a guy.
Or to get the guy to just say, I'm out.
Yeah. Well, but if you wound him, two guys are going to go out.
Yeah, and no, but if you truly make him say, I'm out, and he posts it to Facebook, 10 guys won't recruit. All right, I think we're just about at the end of our time here.
You got 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Nice, okay. I don't know what I'm talking about. So any last questions, comments? We'll probably take 3 or, I saw your guys' hands and one more there, so.
Okay, well, since we do have the 5 minutes and just a couple more people raising their hands, something that's been going through my mind, progression of technology, submarine warfare, for example, you know, it's advanced quite a bit, especially here in the United States. And so what some other countries have started to do, like the Chinese, for example, is using older technology to beat the newer technology. Like using the diesel-electric submarine because now it's all about silence, and it runs even more quietly, even though it's not as efficient and it's slower. Right. So, how do you think that's going to impact the future marching military technology?
Well, we're still not getting rid of our knives. At the end of the day, we've still got our combat knives. There's going to be technologies that we're going to continue to find 2 or 3 steps down the road. You know, suddenly they're going to work really well. A good example of this was the use of horse-bound SAS troops in the end of World War II, which were incredibly effective because everyone else was expecting a Jeep. And when a guy comes through with an assault rifle on horseback,
Jeeps were more effective.
You talk about, one thing they talk about in the military a lot is breaking the OODA loop, the psychological effect of what happens when your opponent simply cannot react to what they see. And they have no way to anticipate what you are doing and how this affects them. And one of the, you know, this is one of those ones where do you show up in a fighter jet? Do you parachute in? Or do you show up guns blazing in an ice cream truck? One of those gives you a couple seconds of, what the hell is? And in that time, if you can make that work to your advantage, that's a weapon.
One of the problems we're seeing with the new tech is we are defending against it, which is good. I mean, guys are coming home, but they're all broken.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and there's that, when we talk about, you know, what counts as a casualty.
Psychologically.
Exactly, and you know, do they win by attrition through money? Even if we won the battle, they say, but you're broke.
And an important thing to keep in mind is that there's always psychological casualties, civilian and military alike, and there's always fallout, regardless of everything. And I apologize, guys, unfortunately we're at the end of our time here, but it's a very good point. I think a good takeaway from this is really, you know, we haven't talked too much about the technologies, but I'm sure anyone here has 10 technologies off the top of their head that could be vital candidates. I think the important part is to notice the big trend that we've been talking about here today is that technology and the human element of warfare has certain immutable elements that have always been there and will continue to be there. And at the end of the day, we're keeping our combat knives, we're bludgeoning people to death with our newfangled technology,
And don't fight any war unless you're prepared to win.
well,
That's what winning is.
We're not killing civilians at the same time.
thank you guys very
You
much.
gotta define winning.
for,
You gotta define winning.
Thank you for your participation.